I sat on a heavy stone planter's edge outside Metro Health Medical Center, clutching my hands together until my knuckles turned stark white. The late September air was crisp, carrying the metallic scent of nearby traffic, and the cold sunlight struggled to warm the massive steel and glass structure of the hospital. Yet the warmth of the sun didn't penetrate the cold dread pooling in my chest. My husband, Elijah Vance, was lying in the intensive care unit behind those impenetrable walls, fighting for his life against an unseen enemy we never saw coming. People hurried past, their conversations muffled and commonplace talking about work deadlines, weekend plans, or the new autumn menu at a local cafe. For a second, I desperately wished I could be one of them. Just another woman enjoying a bright day, laughing about mundane things. But I wasn't that woman anymore. My entire world had violently shrunk to the suffocating confines of a hospital room and the relentless, mechanical beeping of medical machines. Elijah used to be unstoppable. He was a master craftsman, the kind of man who would work a grueling 12-hour day building exquisite, custom cabinetry, then come home and still possess the vital energy to effortlessly cook an elaborate dinner and listen intently to every detail of my day. He had this easy, steadfast way of smiling that made you believe with absolute certainty that everything would be okay, even when life felt crushingly heavy. He was my safe sanctuary, my steady ground, and now, watching him slowly fade, I felt terrifyingly like I was sinking on quicksand. Just 7 months ago, we genuinely believed we had a lifetime ahead of us. We talked excitedly about the grand, unaffordable European vacations we'd take someday. A bigger, sun-filled house for the 2 children we fiercely dreamed of having. Maybe even a chaotic, silly Labrador. Then Elijah came home one wet evening, profoundly pale and utterly exhausted, brushing off his fatigue as simply a monster of a day. But the tiredness didn't recede. It lingered, it deepened, and chillingly, it morphed into unexplained. Ugly bruises and terrifying nights when he struggled, gasping, to catch his breath. The hematologist finally spoke the words that still felt unreal. Words that shattered our carefully built world: severe autoimmunoplastic anemia. His own body was in a catastrophic civil war, actively destroying his bone marrow, effectively shutting down the very factory that was responsible for making his blood cells. Without a stem cell transplant, the doctors warned, hope was little more than an empty promise. I tried desperately to project an image of strength in front of him, holding his hand and whispering fierce promises. We'll fight through this, Eli. We always do. But every single night, I would hide in the small, sterile bathroom, crying until my head throbbed, my desperate sobs muffled tightly by a hand towel, because I knew a harrowing truth that Elijah didn't. He had no living family. He had been raised entirely through the broken foster care system, never once knowing his biological parents, never even knowing if he had any brothers or sisters, and without any close blood relatives. The odds of finding a perfectly compatible bone marrow donor match were crushingly low, almost impossible. We had immediately registered with the National Donor Registry, but the doctors were brutally honest. The wait for a compatible stranger could take months, potentially years, and Elijah simply didn't possess that kind of time. Earlier today, when his lead physician, Dr. Chung, had pulled me aside, her measured words had felt like a punch to the gut. Amelia, she said, her voice weighted with professional sorrow, we are critically running out of options. If we don't find a compatible donor soon... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I knew exactly what she meant. I sat there on that stone bench, hot tears streaming down my cheeks, feeling utterly and sickeningly useless. I was a critical care nurse. I had dedicated my entire professional life to helping others heal and survive. Yet, I couldn't save the one man I loved most in this world. allowed myself to think of the beautiful life we had meticulously built together. Our perfectly imperfect little brick cottage on the west side of Cleveland. The robust hand-carved coffee table he'd made for us on our first anniversary. The simple framed note he'd once scribbled that still hung by the kitchen door. "You are my forever." The thought of losing him was an unbearable physical agony. And yet, deep down, a quiet, cynical voice whispered that I might have to start the horrific process of preparing for it. I hated myself for even entertaining the thought, but grief had already begun to coil its icy, suffocating fingers around my already fractured heart. Then, as if life hadn't been cruel enough, I overheard something. A hushed, seemingly insignificant conversation that would unexpectedly change everything. I'd first met Elijah on a night when life felt incandescently light and completely ordinary. Long before the all-consuming shadow of hospitals and complex medical charts darkened our days, I had just finished my final brutal exam at nursing school. Exhausted but blissfully free, my friends had dragged me to a lively, forgotten cafe in downtown Cleveland's historic district. It wasn't modern or flashy, just a charming, old brick building with warmly worn wooden floors and the rich, intoxicating smell of dark roasted coffee that clung pleasantly to everything. Remember him walking in like it happened only yesterday. He was carrying a slightly torn paper bag filled with brass hardware from the local supply store, his denim work jacket lightly dusted with wood shavings. There was this arresting calmness about him, the kind of quiet, deep confidence that makes you instinctively look twice. He smiled, a lovely, slightly shy, crooked half-smile when our eyes connected, and he asked if the empty seat across from me was taken. We talked for over 2 intoxicating hours that night about everything and nothing. How he was obsessed with the precision of woodworking, how I dreamed of working in pediatrics, and how we both inexplicably hated olives but shared a profound love for warm apple pie. When he laughed, really laughed, his blue eyes crinkled beautifully at the corners, and something deep inside me just knew. From that magical night onward, Elijah became the most vital constant in my life. He'd show up with thoughtful, small surprises, a jar of artisan honey from a rural market, a huge bouquet of wild sunflowers wrapped in simple butcher paper, a rare new book because he'd remembered an offhand comment I'd made about wanting to read it. He had a magnificent, effortless way of making the mundane feel subtly like magic. 2 years later, we were standing beneath a massive, ancient oak tree, exchanging our vows in front of a small gathering of friends and chosen family. I wore my grandmother's pearl necklace, and Elijah openly, sweetly cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. He wasn't the kind of man who ever tried to conceal deep emotion. He believed in showing love fully, without any hint of hesitation. We moved into our little brick cottage, a complete fixer-upper that Elijah, the confident craftsman, insisted he could handle entirely himself. And he did. He spent every weekend meticulously sanding floors, constructing perfect built-in shelves, and even expertly crafting that robust coffee table for me as our anniversary gift. That table still sits in our living room, a silent, beautiful witness to countless, quiet evenings of us side by side, sharing late-night talks. Life felt full, even if it wasn't what anyone would call perfect. The only thing conspicuously missing was children. We started trying soon after the wedding, expecting it to happen effortlessly, like it seemed to for everyone else around us. But month after month, nothing shifted. Doctors told me my body wasn't fully cooperating, that I might never conceive a child naturally. We endured the exhaustive treatments, the relentless hormone shots, the endless, soul-crushing appointments, and eventually, the draining process of IVF. The first attempt failed. So did the second. With each negative test result, I felt a little more broken, as if my own body had completely betrayed both me and him. But Elijah, he never once, not for a second, blamed me. He would hold me on those dark nights when I cried until my head ached, whispering, "Amelia, this doesn't change how much I love you." Not one bit. He even enthusiastically suggested adoption, talking excitedly about the sheer number of children who desperately needed homes, about how we could still have a wonderful, full family. I genuinely wanted to be happy with that idea, but a profound, deep part of me still longed to see a child with his breathtaking blue eyes and that charming, crooked half smile he wore when he was trying not to burst out laughing. One devastating day, after yet another failed cycle, I collapsed into his arms, apologizing through my tears, whispering, "You deserve a wife who can give you a family." He gently tilted my chin, so I had no choice but to meet his unwavering eyes and said, with profound clarity, "Amelia, I didn't marry you for children. I married you for you. You are my family." That was Elijah, steadfast, exceptionally kind, and fundamentally selfless. He could have been angry, resentful, or distant. Instead, he chose love, fully every single time. Looking back now, I realize how those earlier struggles were, in a way, preparing us for what was rapidly coming. The nights we held each other through soul-deep disappointment, the dreams we had to gently reshape together, they all became the subtle blueprint for surviving the storm that was about to hit. Because when Elijah fell gravely ill, the world as we knew it violently collapsed. And yet, even lying there, terrifyingly weak and pale, he still tried, desperately, to be the strong one. He joked feebly about the repulsive hospital food, teased me gently about worrying too much, and promised me we'd get through this. Just like we'd survived everything else, but deep down, I knew this was catastrophically different. This was literally life and death. And I was not ready, not prepared, to imagine a life without him. I was sitting in the bustling hospital courtyard, desperate for a breath of fresh air and a moment of peace when I heard it. 2 hospital maintenance employees were on a quick smoke break nearby, chatting casually, completely unaware that I could hear their every word. "You know that guy in ICU, Vance?" One said, taking a drag. "The one with the bad blood thing? He looks just like this fellow who lives out in Maple Grove. I swear, it's like looking at the exact same person." My heart completely stopped. Maple Grove, a tiny rural mountain town just a couple of hours east of Cleveland. Could it really be nothing more than a simple coincidence? Or could this mean Elijah actually had family out there? Someone who might miraculously be a match for his rare condition? For the first time in what felt like 100 years, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Fragile, trembling, almost unbelievable hope, but hope nonetheless. I stood frozen in the courtyard, their overheard words echoing loudly in my ears. "He looks just like this guy who lives out in Maple Grove." Maple Grove was an isolated, small valley town, about a 2-hour drive east into the foothills of Ohio. I'd only been there once, years ago, during a community outreach program. It was the kind of place where the pace of life truly slowed down, where people still waved easily at total strangers passing by. Could it really be a complete coincidence? People resemble each other all the time, but something deep inside me whispered otherwise. Elijah had grown up entirely within the cool foster care system, abandoned at birth, with absolutely no information about his biological family. He had spent years quietly wondering if there was someone out there with his exact same eyes, his same charming, crooked half-smile, someone who might actually share his blood. He buried the thought, choosing instead to focus on building a future with me, choosing to believe that family was purely what you built, not what you were simply born into. That now, family wasn't just an abstract, emotional idea. It could be the terrifying difference between his life and his death. That night, I barely slept a wink. I sat at Elijah's bedside, holding his frail hand while the medical machines hummed softly. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow but thankfully steady. "I'm going to fix this, Eli," I whispered fiercely. "I don't care what it takes." The next morning, I marched into the nursing director's office and filed for emergency medical leave. My director, bless her heart, didn't ask me questions. She knew Elijah's desperate situation. She just hugged me tightly before signing the form. I packed a single bag, my heart hammering with a painful mix of dread and absolute fierce determination. I didn't even know the man's name, only that he lived in Maple Grove and apparently looked exactly like my husband. I had absolutely no plan, just a single precious picture of Elijah on my phone and a fragile, vital thread of hope. Before leaving, I went to Elijah's room. He was thankfully awake, smiling faintly when he saw me. "You look like you're about to take on the world," he teased, his voice weak but still warm. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I might be." He tried to ask more, but I stopped him. "Don't worry about it, okay? Just rest. I'll be back before you even know it." I desperately wanted to tell him everything about Maple Grove, about the man who might be his family, but I couldn't risk giving him this monumental hope, only to shatter it brutally if it turned out to be nothing more than an awful, cruel coincidence. The drive out of Cleveland felt completely surreal. The busy interstate eventually gave way to winding country roads, beautiful fields of late summer wildflowers, and finally the gently rolling, pine-covered hills leading into Maple Grove. As I crossed the old, rusted metal bridge leading into the town limits, I whispered a silent, desperate prayer. "Please let this be real. Let there be someone out there who can save him." I parked near the small, dusty general store and stepped out, clutching my phone tightly. The people here moved at an entirely different pace. Farmers loading feed sacks, an elderly woman sweeping her neat porch, children riding bicycles on the dirt streets. Every face I saw, I studied meticulously, searching for some trace of Elijah's sharp jawline, his unique eyes. Anything. I approached the clerk at the general store, a kindly, weathered man in his 50s. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for someone. I don't know his name, but people say he looks exactly like this." I showed him Elijah's photo. The man's eyes immediately widened in surprise. "You're probably talking about Micah Sterling. Lives out past the apple orchards on Old Mill Road. Yeah, he does look like that, now that you mention it." My heart literally leaped. "Could you possibly give me directions?" He did, and I thanked him profusely before racing back to my car. My hands trembled violently on the steering wheel as I drove toward what might be the answer to every desperate prayer I'd whispered in the past few months. I didn't know if this Micah Sterling was actually related to Elijah, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was about to find out. The road to Old Mill Road was little more than a stretch of cracked, uneven asphalt winding through towering pines and open autumnal fields. A soft, chilling drizzle began to fall, the kind that seemed to hang in the air like a fine, blurring mist, clinging to my windshield and obscuring the edges of the horizon. I slowed the car as I spotted a worn wooden mailbox with faded, peeling white letters. Sterling. The house behind it was old, deeply weathered, and surrounded by a field of corn stubble and muddy tire tracks. A rusted lone swing set creaked mournfully in the wind, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked once. For a terrifying moment, I sat paralyzed in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles screamed, my pulse pounding a frantic rhythm in my ears. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to knock on a complete stranger's door and make a profound fool of myself? But then I saw a mental image of Elijah, his frail hand clutching mine, his attempt at a smile trying to hide the pure fear in his eyes. And I forced myself out of the car. The wooden steps groaned loudly as I climbed them. I knocked lightly at first, then harder when no one immediately answered. After an eternity, the door slowly creaked open. A man stood there, even taller than I'd expected, broad-shouldered but slightly slouched, with dark, sandy blonde hair falling loosely over his forehead. His eyes, my breath caught painfully in my throat. They were the exact piercing blue as Elijah's, the identical shape, the same unnerving intensity. He blinked at me, cautious. "Can I help you?" His voice was deep and cautious, with a rough, low edge. Like someone who hadn't had to entertain strangers very often, I held out my phone with trembling hands, immediately showing him the picture of Elijah. This is my husband. His name is Elijah Vance. People said you look like him." The man frowned, staring intently at the screen for what felt like forever. His expression shifted confusion, then disbelief, and finally, something intensely painful. He slowly rubbed the back of his neck. "Well, I'll be damned." He looked up at me again, his gaze softer now, utterly searching. "Who are you?" "Amelia. I'm his wife." He stepped aside without another word. "You better come in." The inside of the house was humble, worn wood floors, comfortable, mismatched furniture, and the faint, combined smell of strong coffee and motor oil. He gestured toward a sturdy wooden chair. "Sit, You're saying he's your husband?" I nodded, clutching my bag tightly in my lap. "He's in the hospital in Cleveland. He's very sick. He desperately needs a bone marrow transplant. They said he has no family. But then I heard about you and I just ... I had to come." My voice finally broke on the last word. The man, Micah Sterling, sat opposite me, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. He looked at the photo one more time, slowly shaking his head. I think he might be my brother." Those words hit me with such force I almost couldn't breathe. "Your brother?" Micah nodded, a deep sorrow washing over his face. "Our mom. She was never much of a mother, to be honest. She had a lot of kids, most with different fathers. When I was little, she had another baby, a boy. She said she wasn't keeping him, signed papers at the hospital, and just left him there. I was too young to do anything, but I never forgot. Always wondered what happened to him." He rubbed his face with both hands, his voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't even know his name until right now." My eyes instantly blurred with fresh tears. Elijah's been searching for family his whole life. He thought he was completely alone. Micah's jaw tightened and he stood up abruptly, his mind clearly made up. "I'll do it. The transplant. I don't even need to think about it. He's my brother. If there's even a chance I can help him live, of course I will." He walked quickly into the kitchen and returned seconds later with his truck keys in hand. "When do we go?" For a second, I just stared at him, absolutely stunned by the speed and finality of his decision. In my mind, I had prepared for convincing him, for explaining the complex medical situation, maybe even for desperate begging. But there was none of that. It was as if he had been unknowingly waiting for this exact, impossible moment. We left Maple Grove that very evening, the rain now falling heavier, streaking the windshield as Micah drove his old pickup truck close behind my car. My chest felt immeasurably lighter for the first time in many long months. There was still fear, there would always be fear, but now there was also something else, hope that felt solid, like the earth beneath my feet. When we arrived at Metro Health Medical Center, I led Micah through the sterile white halls directly to Elijah's room. Elijah was awake, propped up by pillows, his skin pale, but his eyes instantly brightening when he saw me, then narrowing in profound confusion when they shifted to the large, familiar-looking man beside me. For a long, charged moment, no one spoke. Elijah's mouth opened slightly, like he was staring at a ghost of himself. Micah stepped forward, a powerful, raw emotion thick in his voice. "I think I'm your brother." Elijah blinked once, tears instantly welling up in his impossibly blue eyes. My brother. I stood back, watching two men strangers a day ago, brothers by bloodlock eyes, as if instantly recognizing something only they could feel. Elijah reached out a shaking, weak hand, and Micah took it firmly, engulfing it in his own. "We'll talk later," Micah said softly, his voice full of a promise. "But right now, I'm here to save your life." Micah's test results came back faster than I could have imagined. The doctors wanted to expedite everything because Elijah's condition was deteriorating so quickly. When the hematologist finally stepped into the small waiting room with a soft, relieved smile, my knees nearly buckled underneath me. "He's a strong match," she announced, her voice filled with professional joy. "One of the best we've seen in a while." I turned to Micah, tears immediately brimming in my eyes. "Did you hear that? You're a match. You can save him." Micah's expression wavered between shock and a deep, resolute determination. "Then let's do it," he said, his voice firm. "When do we start?" That night, Elijah and Micah finally had time to talk, side by side. I stayed quietly just outside the doorway for the first few minutes, giving them a precious sliver of privacy. I could still hear their voices, low, intensely emotional, hesitant at first, then warmer, thicker as the minutes quickly passed. Elijah's voice broke as he spoke. "I used to dream about having a brother. I thought it was stupid, like dreaming about a house you'll never live in. But here you are, real." Micah chuckled quietly, though his voice was thick with tears. "Guess life had other plans, huh?" "I'm sorry I wasn't there, Danny." Micah used the nickname Elijah's foster mother had briefly used. "I didn't even know." "You don't have to be sorry," Elijah said, gripping Micah's hand with surprising strength for someone so weak. "You're here now. That's all that matters." When I finally stepped back into the room, Elijah looked at me with damp eyes and whispered, "I have a brother. I'm not alone." I kissed his forehead and smiled, whispering back, "You never were." The bone marrow transplant procedure was scheduled for the very next morning. I barely slept a wink, my mind frantically racing through every single possible outcome. Micah, however, was incredibly calm, even joking easily with the surgical nurses as they prepped him for the donation. "Never thought I'd be giving my bone marrow to a guy I met yesterday," he teased, then looked over at Elijah and added softly, "But I'm glad it's him." The hours dragged by, but eventually it was successfully done. The transplant went smoothly, and Elijah was moved to a specialized recovery room while the new stem cells began their extraordinary, life-saving work. I sat tirelessly by his bedside, holding his hand, finally feeling the genuine warmth slowly return to his pale skin. For the first time in months, his face held a hint of much-needed color. Micah came in later, looking thoroughly tired but immensely content, and Elijah reached out weakly to clasp his brother's arm. "You just gave me a second chance," he whispered, his voice gaining strength. Micah smiled, a full, true smile that reached his identical blue eyes. "Guess we're even now. You gave me family." I couldn't stop the hot tears this time. For months, I had been carrying so much agonizing fear, so much isolating loneliness. But now, sitting there, completely surrounded by these two magnificent men who had found each other against all sensible odds, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in so long. Profound peace. The weeks following the transplant felt like stepping into a brand new world, one where hope finally blessedly outweighed fear. Elijah's body responded incredibly well to the transplant. Each morning, I'd watch for the tiniest, wonderful signs, a bit more color in his cheeks, a steadier, deeper tone to his voice, a stronger, confident grip when he held my hand. Micah stayed tirelessly nearby, sleeping uncomfortably on an old, pull-out chair in the waiting area when the hospital rules prevented him from staying in Elijah's room overnight. He never once complained. "He's really my brother," he said softly to me one evening, staring at Elijah through the glass. As if still trying to convince himself of the miracle, Elijah began to regain his strength slowly. And one crisp, beautiful autumn afternoon, he took his first supported steps outside since the transplant. A week later, Elijah was finally discharged, and we returned to our little brick cottage on the west side of Cleveland, this time with Micah following closely behind in his old pickup truck. A permanent, welcome addition to our lives. The house felt wonderfully different now. Fuller somehow, like it had been quietly waiting for this profound reunion all along. In the weeks that followed, Micah became a steadfast, regular presence. He and Elijah would sit on the porch in the cool evenings, sharing the few childhood memories Elijah had of his foster homes, and Micah enthusiastically filling in the massive gaps about their mother and their early shared years. One particularly golden autumn evening, Elijah pulled me outside to the porch where a brand new, exquisitely crafted oak rocking chair sat, finished with careful precision. "For you," he said simply, his voice rich and full. I sat down and felt tears blur my vision as I rocked gently, the chair creaking with the familiar, welcome warmth. "You know," Elijah said later that night, squeezing my hand gently as we sat by the fire, "I used to think being an orphan meant I'd always be alone, but I was wrong. I have you, and now I have him too." I looked at him, feeling the truth of those simple words settle deep in my chest. "Family isn't always about blood, Eli," I whispered. "But sometimes it is, and it's beautiful." Our story had begun in agonizing despair, but it didn't end there. It ended with family, with second chances, with a brother found and a life renewed. And as I closed my eyes, the crackle of the fire and Elijah's warm, strong hand in mine, I realized something powerful. Sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, just when you're about to lose all hope.